Hi, my name is Brian McCain from the Gaia Project. In this video I'm going to show you how to create a few graphs in Microsoft Excel. I've got a Microsoft Excel sheet open here with three sets of data, one on the left here, one in the middle, and one on the right. The first thing we need to think about when creating graphs is how we're going to present that data. We can take really great data that you've spent a lot of time collecting and put it in a graph poorly, use the wrong type of graph, and it becomes almost meaningless. Conversely, we can take bad data and present it well, and it'll give your audience an idea that doesn't actually exist. So the data itself is just as important as how we go about presenting it. So I'm going to start with this data that I have on the left here. We have three columns. We have time, temperature 1, and temperature 2. And this data would be something that we would get from two temperature probes recording the temperature at set periods of time. And in this case, we can see that it was every 60 seconds. It's 0 seconds, 60, 120, 180 seconds. So whenever we have a set of data, a value that changes with time, it's really important that we make sure we select the right graph, as I mentioned earlier. And in this case, when we have a value that changes with time, we probably want to select a line chart or potentially a scatter chart. A line chart tells us that we know something about what's happening to the data in between some of these time periods, like what's happening between 0 and 60. We're going from 21 to 21.1 seconds. We know from the fact that we collected this data in a classroom that the temperature is probably moving gradually up to that temperature. So the way we're going to start is I'm going to select this first column of data that we want to plot. We want to plot this temperature data. So I'm going to select that whole column, including the title. Microsoft Excel is smart enough to realize that this is a title and not actually part of your data. And it'll mean that you don't have to type it in again later. And if you happen to change it here, it will also change in your graph. So we're going to select that column of data as I've done there. We're then going to click Insert up here at the top and click on Line. And while we have a number of different line charts here that you can read more about by hovering your mouse over, most of the time we're going to use the basic line chart, which is the first one in the list. So I'm going to click on that. And instantly we get a graph popping up. And for many people, they would take this graph and they would simply insert it into their presentation and think that they're all done. But we're several steps away here from having a graph that really conveys meaning to their audience. The first thing is, if we look down here at the bottom of the graph, we'll see that we just have a series of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, all the way up to 18, as opposed to having the actual time at which that temperature was recorded. So the way we're going to change that is we're going to have to change the values that we have on the x-axis. So I'm just going to click here in the middle of the graph, right-click on the graph, and click on Select Data. And you're going to get a pop-up window that looks like this, and we're going to see horizontal category axis labels. And this is where we choose what we want to display along the bottom of that graph. So I'm going to click Edit, and then I'm going to select all of the times that we want along the bottom of the graph. Not the title this time, just the numbers. And we're going to click OK. And we're going to click OK again. And we're going to see already along the bottom of the graph we've got an improvement here in that we have the actual numbers being displayed, the actual time in seconds. So that's a good start, but we're not done yet. If we look at that x-axis, we can see, well, there's numbers there, but as an audience member, I don't know what those numbers mean. So we want to tell the audience that it's in seconds so that they can instantly determine that at 600 seconds, this was the temperature. So again, selecting the graph, we're going to go up here and click on Layout. And we're going to click on Axis Titles and Primary Horizontal Axis Title. So the horizontal axis is that bottom one along the bottom. And we're just going to select Title below Axis. And you'll see it pops up there saying Axis Title. And we can now add in a new title. So Time. And I always like to put the units there so everyone knows we're not talking about hours, we're talking about seconds here. Now we're going to do the same thing with the vertical axis. So we're going to click on Layout, we're going to click on Axis Title. This time we're going to click on Primary Vertical Axis. And there's a few different options here. It's really just personal preference. I like to pick the one that I find the easiest to read, which is Rotated Title. So again, you can see it pop up there. we're going to select that and change it to temperature. And this is going to be in degrees Celsius. Now we have a fairly meaningless title here, temperature 1 degrees Celsius. So if I double click on that and select it, I'm going to give it a more meaningful title. So temperature in classroom versus time. That just tells your audience a little bit about what this graph is designed to tell them. And finally, you can see on the right here, we have a legend. We only have one line on this graph, and this legend is taking up quite a bit of space, so that we don't really need it there. What that is telling us is already told to us through everything else on the graph. So we can go up to Layout, and we can click on Legend and turn it off. So we all of a sudden have a much better looking graph. If you were to present that to your audience, even if you weren't around to describe it to them, they would be able to get a lot of information just from reading that graph. Now, we can change virtually everything associated with this graph, including the colors of the lines and the line thickness. There's all kinds of options which I encourage you to play around with. You can click on virtually any part of the graph, right-click on it, and select Format Data Series, for example. Or over here, we can Format Axis. There's all kinds of options, and the only real way that you learn them is by playing around with them. I generally find that the Microsoft Excel defaults provide very clear, clean, and good-looking graphs. The only thing we might want to change here is we can see the x-axis goes from 19.6 degrees to 21.2. So that makes the drop in temperature, which we can see actually only went from 21 down to 20.3, only 0.7 degrees. It makes it look quite significant. So if we were to click on that, on the y-axis there, and click on Format Axis, you'll have a pop-up window, and the first menu here on the left is Axis Options. And we can see that the minimum and maximum of that y-axis are automatically set. If we wanted to change that to range from, say, 0 to 25 degrees, and then close it, you can see we now have a very different looking graph. Those variations appear very small, and the temperature in the room appears to be quite steady. So you have to think about what it is you're trying to convey to your audience in how you present your graph. If it's the actual variations that you're interested in, then perhaps the previous version was the best way to go. If what you're trying to show is that there is a very slow, steady decline in the temperature, this is a much better viewpoint to look at it from. So now we want to add that second temperature reading onto the same graph here. So while we could have done this in the beginning by simply selecting both columns at the same time, we're now going to add this second one manually to an existing graph. So again, I'm going to click inside the plot area of the graph, and I'm going to right-click on the graph and click Select Data. Now on the left-hand side, you can see where it says Legend Entries Series here. This is where we enter our data sets. You can see we already have one called Temperature 1 in degrees Celsius here. We're going to add a second one. Under Series Name, this is where we're going to enter the title. And we don't have to actually type it in. We can just click on a cell in our graph, and it'll take that value and make it the title of that particular line on your chart. Under Series Values, this is where we enter the actual data values. So you're going to select there, and you're going to delete what's existing. If you don't delete what is already in there, you'll run into a few problems. So we're going to delete that, and we're going to select all of those new data values. And you can see it instantly previews it on the graph. We're going to click OK, and OK again. And so now we have our graph showing these two temperatures. Now we have a bit of a problem in that if I'm looking at this now, I don't understand what the difference between the blue line and the red line is. So I'm going to add my legend back to it. So I click on the graph, click up here at Layout, click on Legend, and Show Legend, and again there's all kinds of options. I'm going to put it at the bottom here. So we've got Temperature 1 and Temperature 2. Temperature 1 and Temperature 2 aren't particularly descriptive, so I'm actually going to change those to make them something that's more informative. So rather than having to change them in the graph, I can just go over here to where it says Temperature 1, and I'm going to call that Indoor Temperature. And the second one I'm going to call Outdoor Temperature. And you can see that automatically updates on your graph right there. I'm now going to change the title just to become a bit more descriptive again. So comparison between indoor and outdoor temperature over time. So I can now move that graph around. I can resize it to make that data stand out even more. But all of a sudden we have a very informative graph that tells us about those temperature readings that we collected. So that's how we go about doing that first set of data, using a line chart to display that data.